So this is the Chief Sloly story. Now, why does it matter? In my opinion, it matters a lot, as Chief Sloly was the person that was in charge of Ottawa, which was the reason why Ottawa was the reason why they invoked the Emergencies Act. Sloly was in charge the entire time up until the 14th. It was when he was asked to resign. And we're going to go through that process of the dates, the plans, the miscommunication, what happened beforehand, the change in culture they were trying to do, who got dismissed, who got removed, where is the infighting, where is the communication, what is the pressure going on, and it's pretty bad. And that led to trucks being in the wrong place and people being in the wrong place and the board not communicating well, and there's politicians doing whatever they do or don't do. And this Chief Sloly story is basically, from what I've seen this far, in my opinion, is the microcosm of the dysfunction of our Canadian institutions. And you can't be mad at Sloly for what he was saying. He was supporting his team, which is his city, his organization, his players, which would be his officers. I didn't like his take that him and Officer Karik thought that this was a national security threat. They were operating on very loose knowledge with that. But I thought most of Sloly's testimony was fine. And again, it showed how shitty our communication is between our police forces and some of the issues that exist in our society. So let's move this out of the way. So we're going to get into that story right now. Try not to fall asleep. I had some clips and cuts in there. And just for evidence purposes, it's important to know what the hell happened here in February 2022 in Ottawa. All right, enjoy the show.
You see, under Ottawa Police Service, 2019 to 2022, you talked about how you were given a major culture organization change mandate, and that's something you just outlined for us.
Yes, sir.
Tell us about some of the challenges you faced once you took the post.
I'm not sure the commission has all the time in the world for that list, but any effort of change is going to be difficult, particularly in a large organization. In this case, I believe the Ottawa Police Service is over a century old. And these were long-standing structural deficit issues. Needed investment in recruiting through staff development training. Leadership development in particular was something that repeatedly our membership identified and external auditors identified. And those things just that's not a light switch you can turn on and off. It's something that you have to build and grow and almost organically move through the organization. Operationally, while they were excellent in some ways, I just want to be clear, Commissioner, the Ottawa Police Service, and one of the reasons why I came here, had a reputation, deservedly so, of being one of the best operational police services. We've heard about their expertise in planning. Their ability through missing persons investigations was second to none. They had really in some cases, advanced HR systems that were to be seen as a best practice. So this is not a deficit across the board, but there were significant deficits in very specific areas that was contributing to some of the cultural and morale issues. My attempt in the first 3 months was really to go around on a listening process in small groups, large groups, internally and externally, to identify those areas. Bring a command team that was, even in the early days, a struggle. There was significant challenges at the command team level, but people were leaning in and doing their best. I would say, though, that the challenges really came in March of 2020. 3 significant events: the suspension of one of my 2 deputy chiefs, the culmination of a significant internal criminal corruption investigation where 3 of my officers were arrested after an extensive joint RCMP Ottawa Police Service investigation, and of course the declaration of the global pandemic. 2 months later, the death and murder of George Floyd, the Black Lives Movement and the Defund movement. I think that signaled the start, not just here in Ottawa, but across police services in North America, I suggest around the world, as a significant change in the level of public trust and confidence in policing and the broader justice system. It certainly had material impacts in police services here in Ottawa. The defund movement put significant pressure on our board and our council to adjust the policing budget in regards to size and to change police service delivery in terms of integration. And these were real challenges on top of the significant challenge of a change mandate that the board had explicitly and expressly given to me as the incoming chief.
So you can see right off the hibbity hop that there's a culture issue in the Ottawa police that Sloly has been there to change, and some of us kind of woke. And that's going to cause some issues with people that have already been there. It's hard to bring in a brand new leader when you've had people trying to climb the ladder and now like, why am I going to listen to this dude? So he's now in charge. Now they have issues with communication, and all those other things happen that kind of destroy the morale of the police service. And the vaccine, which one thing that's not mentioned in this, is the vaccine mandate for the police service comes into play, I think, on February 1st. So you have issues within the police service, and they see what's happening on the streets, and some of them are supporting it because they don't want to lose their job February 1st. And so it puts Sloly in a crappy position. So with all that happening at that time, the convoy rolls in, and the information and where the trucks go and what the plan and the other plan and the plan, but where the plans begin starts here.
Deputy Chief Bell, that in this case, a threat risk assessment was in fact conducted. So if I could take you to the document. Actually, this is not the threat assessment, but this is an email you wrote after reading the threat assessment. Do you recall having read the threat assessment that was prepared?
I've seen a document in disclosure that is titled threat assessment. I don't recall receiving and reading that document. I did read the threat assessment that was embedded in the pre-arrival operational plan that I received on January 28th.
Right. So now this one, this email chain, the part that was sent by you was dated January 26th. So, and if we go, so you see that, actually, if we go down further to see the origin of the chain, so not so far. Do you remember receiving an email from a concerned citizen about the potential violence of the upcoming event? And if we scroll up, you forwarded this email to your deputies, and you outlined the concern. If we scroll down to the next page, you described what the concern was, and then you said, yes, yet our briefing note as of last night says that there's no intelligence to indicate that this demo straying will be violent. And you issue this guidance. Please review all available information, intel, incidents, and ensure we have the most accurate threat assessment and the most appropriate operations plan for the event. Now, it's not entirely clear from this email whether or not you've read a threat assessment, but you were certainly aware that there was one.
Yeah, what I'm referring, sorry, thank you, sir. What I'm referring to, I believe, is just a briefing note. I don't know what that would have been in the form of. It could have been an email that was sent around before last night that said there was no intelligence to indicate this was going to be violent, but it wasn't the threat risk assessment document in any of its versions that I was referring to.
I see.
And I laid out a series of, I guess it's 4 points here, of data that had come into my awareness over the course of the night into the morning, including the email that I forwarded, that would suggest opposite. So it was, again, just a reminder, there's contradictory information. Just make sure that that is incorporated into the overall threat risk assessment, and that is as optimal as it can be so that the plan can be as optimal as it can be.
Now, so this is dated January 26th. I want to show you an intelligence assessment conducted by Sergeant Chris Keyes on January 25th. Production we received, we've seen a couple of different versions. I assume that the assessment was updated as the week unfolded, but this is version 1. Does this ring any bell?
It's the first time I'm seeing the document, sir.
Okay. If I could take you to page 5. So the third bullet, the author says that in 6 years of working large demonstration events from the intelligence point of view, the writer has never seen such widespread community action, which means 3 things for planners. First, in the event is likely going to be bigger in crowd size than any demo in recent history, possibly on par with Canada Day events, but more disruptive. Second, there is significant popular support for this event on a scale not seen in recent years. This means the protest groups have access to larger protester pools than they have ever had access to, which means there will be likely widespread disorganization and confusion. Third, local area bandwidth for cellular mobile devices will be impacted significantly, causing communications issues for both the police and the event organizers. Planners should be ready to have police radios on hand to avoid clogged cellular networks. This is an example of the intelligence unit providing relevant intelligence to guide the planning of the events, right?
Yes, sir.
So it's an example of how it's supposed to be done. But there are suggestions here that this event is unlike some of the other recent events. There are signals here. Do you agree that it may be unprecedented?
At this point, I wouldn't say unprecedented. I think Sergeant Chris Keyes is one of our best intelligence operators. I had a chance to interact with him quite a bit when I was at the police service. I think he actually uses some very important language here that caveats his comments. He talks about recent years, not ever, and he does that several times in here. What he's describing is very accurate. We're seeing generally in protests, I'd suggest over the last 15 years in the age of social media, a greater level of mobilization, and increasingly in the last decade, a greater level of a variety of funding and logistical support. This email took me back to Idle No More, oh my gosh, my memory's failing a little bit, Commissioner, sorry, but the Occupy movement, where these sort of sentiments, crowd size, crowd dynamics, logistics, mobilization, larger disaffected populations, polarized populations that would give direct or indirect support would directly protest or indirectly protest. I'm slowing myself down a little bit here. These were elements that we had seen. What Sergeant Chris Keyes is saying in here, my interpretation of it, is that the planners need to be aware this is likely going to be bigger than recent events. He didn't give a time frame. Is that 2 years? Is that 10 years? And so we need to be cognizant of it. So it's a good alarm bell, but it's not a 5 alarm that he's ringing right now.
It's a warning for
A very
potential
healthy,
trouble to
very
come.
healthy warning.
And the last line that was quoted in the last paragraph, as a result, law enforcement is being met with numbers of people beyond the norm. That's what you're saying, a larger crowd size. What would you expect your deputies to do with this kind of warning?
Well, first of all, the deputies would ensure that this information is being shared amongst the planners, as was directed from an intelligence operator over to the planners. I would want to know that they had sufficient systems in place, that when a briefing note like this was produced, that it would go from the intelligence directorate to the planning team, and that it would be, again, used in real time as they were developing the plan in real time. And these are real-time systems. It's not one first and then the other. In real time, information is coming in, very fluid, very fast-moving, very complex situation. My sense from the briefings that I was getting was that that process was in place and it was functioning sufficiently.
Would you expect your deputies to brief up and give you the warning?
On a specific level like this, no.
Now, we heard from Superintendent Bernier when he testified at the commission that after he read the January 27th Hendon report, excuse me, he told Superintendent Drummond about this bizarre disconnect between the Hendon intelligence and the OPS preparation. Do you think that there was a bizarre disconnect?
First of all, while I have the greatest respect for Inspector Bernier, he was not involved directly in the planning or the intelligence risk assessment. Police services and organizations are wonderful places. Everyone has an opinion. The briefings I was getting from the commanders that had been assigned to the task, the people that they had assigned through their responsibilities to produce the information, some of which is displayed on the screen here, did not indicate that there was a bizarre disconnection.
And do you think your deputies were doing the best they could?
I think they were, yes, sir.
And knowing what we know now and reflecting back on the way that the OPS handled or applied the intelligence they got, what lessons, if any, should we learn from that?
Thank you. An important question, Commissioner. Frank, if I'm deviating too far, please pull me back. But probably one of my top recommendations for you to consider, sir. While we had excellent intelligence and particularly excellent support from the Ontario Provincial Police, this was from the very onset a national issue. It was a national event. It started in British Columbia. It was joined on the East Coast, and it brought convoys from the southernmost point in Windsor. Probably the greatest number of participants and vehicles came from our border with Quebec across the 5 interprovincial bridges. The vast majority of the formal intelligence threat risk assessment reports that we relied on came from the Ontario Provincial Police. To this day, I have a question. Why wasn't I getting intelligence threat risk assessments on a regular basis of the quality that I got from the OPP, from our federal partners? And I want to be clear, Commissioner, they contributed meaningfully, and I'm grateful for their contributions. But I've said this in the parliamentary committees, and I'll say it again to the Commissioner. There's a structural deficit in our national intelligence threat risk assessment process. There's a structural deficit in our national intelligence threat risk assessment process.
It's what we've been trying to tell you.
Do you think any reasonable person who consumes your content either regularly or semi-regularly would actually consider Diagolon to be an organization?
I would think not, no.
How do you explain what is included in intelligence reports and what is expressed in national media and expressed by ministers of the highest level in our country?
It's my opinion that the foundational work by the Canadian Anti-Hate Network as pertains to targeting me as a previously government-funded, has enjoyed a fair amount of government funding to target and smear people that they consider perhaps politically inconvenient or people that just want to shut up. They regularly engage in defamatory statements, libelous action, things like this, out of context statements. They'll take a clip here, a sentence there, and stitch it together and make it appear as something that it is not. From there, some media outlets, legacy media outlets, lazily, unfortunately, it appears, took it at face value, copy, paste, print the story, then which is consumed by police officers, which, again, unfortunately, rather than doing any digging themselves or investigating or asking me a single question, take these things at face value and compile these reports. And up the network it goes until it lands on the desk of the public safety minister or perhaps even the prime minister's office, where they're faced with these scenarios that have no basis in reality. I consider this entire situation entirely avoidable. None of this needed to happen. It's absurd, and I consider it the single most embarrassing and grotesque intelligence failure in national history.
I'll say it again to the Commissioner. There's a structural deficit in our national intelligence threat risk assessment process. I'm grateful for the Ontario Provincial Police for filling that gap and doing so to the very best of their ability. But it was not optimal for us or any other jurisdiction that faced any element of these events. And one of my recommendations, sir, with great respect, is that there needs to be an investment in our national intelligence threat risk assessment structure, organizationally, institutionally, through integrated organizations and institutions. Some of that will be a financial investment, but it doesn't all have to be a financial investment. It needs to be an investment to bring this country forward truly into the 21st century, where we are 2.5 decades into it.
Now, by the 27th of January, am I correct? And I believe this evidence came from Superintendent Abrams, that the OPS was expecting somewhere in the range of 3,000 trucks to come to Ottawa downtown.
I recall seeing that number presented by Inspector Lucas.
Right. So with that in mind, if we go to page 4 of the same opinion, we scroll down to page 4, please.
Sorry, with your indulgence, Commissioner, with your indulgence, I do want to be clear, though. What was listed in those 5 points materially happened on the Saturday, the 29th.
Mm-hmm.
Those, I think Deputy Bell gave excellent evidence on his own. I won't repeat his testimony. But what we saw in terms of a violation of our community's rights, our business community's rights, the level of unlawfulness and assaultiveness in the broadest sense of that term, including the literal sense of that term, was not what we expected and was overwhelming, not just for the Ottawa Police Service, most importantly, it was overwhelming for those communities that were most directly impacted by those events that weekend and every other day after that. So this was helpful because it to some degree anticipated that there would be competing charter rights, there would be significant mobility challenges, there would be an impact on our emergency services in the ways that they were described theoretically on the page. Mm-hmm. So there was usefulness in this exercise. It was just a little too little and already in the middle of the events that were still unfolding around us.
I guess my next question, after I take you to the passage I want you to have a chance to consider, is what it would be reasonable to anticipate in light of this guidance from the lawyer. So this paragraph, starting with therefore, while the case law indicates that those who wish to protest have a charter-protected right in doing so, it is not without limits. These limits, as the courts have recognized, prevent threats of violence, acts of violence, and unlawful conduct. Moreover, these limits also prevent demonstrators from obstructing travel on roadways. It is worth noting, however, that there has been at least one decision where it was found that a blockade for a very brief period only constituted a minor inconvenience and was therefore permissible. So this paragraph referenced the need to preserve travel on roadways as a way to limit whatever other competing rights the protesters may have for free assembly and free expression and so on. So having this in mind, can you help me understand why, when upward of 3,000 commercial vehicles and trucks are expected to arrive in downtown Ottawa, that this wouldn't put some limits on where those trucks could access in downtown Ottawa? Thank
you. And as I'm reviewing this document and we're having this dialogue, all of these things were actually within the operational plan. I believe Inspector Lucas has given evidence to you, sir, that he considered that number. He considered it that through the combination of the PLT negotiations engaged by OPP and OPS officers, that there was agreements made with as many of the convoys as possible that would significantly reduce the impact of such events by parking trucks and arranging bus or rideshare into the downtown core that would alleviate much of this, that they recognize that emergency lanes need to be kept open, and there were significant amounts of planning detailed out in the traffic plan and other plans, again, evidence led by many others in that regard. The Ottawa Police Service were neither ignorant of this, and more importantly, they had taken steps to reasonably mitigate this, based significantly on the intelligence and information available, and as we've heard by other OPS members, including Inspector Lucas, Deputy Chief Bell, based on the previous experience that they had with similar types of events in a reasonable, similar time frame. So I think, again, this was an informative document. It validated much of what we were thinking. It provided a more clearly articulated legal basis for what we were thinking. And we put in place the mitigation pieces that I felt were reasonably presented to me in advance of this. And we had the support of an excellent group from the OPP and their PLT as well. We've heard that, unfortunately, the majority of those agreements were broken. Let me be careful about my language. And I believe, sir, it was Inspector Lucas that gave an insight that I was only aware of in his testimony. I believe it was the Windsor convoy that arrived first and largest into the city and occupied the majority of the red zone area along the parliamentary district. Once that happened, the convoys, again, I'm relying on Inspector Lucas's testimony. If I get any of this wrong, I will walk that back. But once that happened, Inspector Lucas described something, I think he called it like a chaotic scramble of convoys breaking off and going anywhere. The traffic plan collapsed. The extra resources held in reserve had to be immediately actioned to try to get the agreements that were in place to get the trucks to the designated parking zones. None of that was accomplished in the morning of, and I guess the early afternoon of the Saturday the 29th. The Windsor group had claimed, for the most part, Wellington Street in the parliamentary district, and everybody else wanted to get as close to that as possible. I shouldn't say everybody else. A lot of other participants, for almost the full duration of that event, tried to get to that most prized and prolific public place. And that was another complicating factor on our operations, our traffic plans, our PLT operations, even our POU operations. So I think we had an informative legal opinion sought at a reasonably early opportunity, received literally in the middle of the event, certainly within less than 24 hours. Stop me if I'm going on too much, sir, but my last point in this, and it's a what if, and I don't want to engage in too much conjecture, but other witnesses have provided this what if. I believe Deputy Chief Bell talked about this. Assuming that even on the 28th, Commissioner, that we decided to lock down the city, close off all the interprovincial bridges and the off-ramps from the 416 and 417 highways, we would have needed, in Deputy Chief Bell's estimation, 2,000 officers. I think it would have actually been more. Even if that was our wish, even if that was the clearest conclusion that came from any of the Hendon reports or any other combination of intelligence or legal opinions, on the 28th of January, we were not going to get 2,000 extra officers into the city and deployed on a plan that could execute and implement anything that relates to this.
Now, you pointed out that this became the reality as of the 28th. It materialized, in your word.
On the 29th, sir, sorry.
Oh, no, the 29th. But isn't it fair to ask that by the 27th, when OPS knew that 3,000 vehicles were coming to Ottawa, and much of the online messaging suggests that the protesters had an intent to stay for as long as the mandates were not lifted, why isn't it predictable? And why shouldn't the OPS be acting on this advice to take active steps to mitigate access to the downtown core?
Two things. First of all, we did take active steps. Roads were closed. We've heard repeated testimony from OPS and OPP senior officers that there were efforts to manage the convoys en route in on the King's highways, a new term. I'm so used to the Queen's highways, but the King's highways. And so there were mitigation efforts. Second thing, and it does relate to the first, the biggest mitigation effort was the work of the excellent PLT teams from the OPP, which is the best-in-class PLT program in the country. I hope I haven't disrespected my RCMP colleagues, but that's a humble opinion. Take it for what it's worth. They have an excellent PLT program, but our PLT was engaged, I believe, from Commissioner Carrique's evidence, or it might have been Commissioner Abrams' evidence, engaged as the Western convoys crossed Manitoba, and they were engaged with all the other convoys. So PLT had negotiated in good faith and had received good faith agreements, small a agreements, because I don't think it's a contract, that the 3,000 trucks would be mitigated substantially by their willingness to move those trucks into pre-designated areas and carpool, for lack of a better term, into the core. They had agreed not to block the emergency lanes. We had no indication, even on this date, that we were going to have the type of public display of unlawfulness, terrible term, and my English teacher will turn over a grave, assaultiveness in the broadest sense, sensory as well as physical, hate-related incidents that we saw materialize and metastasize on the 29th into the 30th and beyond. Hate-related incidents.
Hate-related incident.
Let me ask you now, from your perspective, how did that weekend unfolded? Tell us about the events.
Fast and furious. I was reading the 9 o'clock briefing on the Saturday morning. Whether you find this as validation or not, Commissioner, but the 9 o'clock briefing that I received on the Saturday morning, the 29th, was still talking about a weekend event. It described we might have a tent city at the end of this. Tent city in the vernacular, meaning that we would have some 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe 20 tents somewhere in an NCR park, Confederation Park, and that we would need to remove it as we had in previous ways. And I'd seen that done during my tenure. There's a bit of a back and forth that I'm quoted in as saying, well, can we make sure that we have our ESU, which is our Emergency Services Unit, down on the ground, and when anybody brings out a tent, can we, in a very smiling and polite way, ask them not to put their tent up so we have less work to do after the weekend? That is literally the substantive assessment. Traffic plan is working, PLT agreements are in place, convoys are arriving, officers are ready to go, Intersect has stood up, NCRCC has stood up, and we might have a bit of a tent city to deal with. That is consistent with all of the briefings, intelligence and operational, on balance, in summary, that I had been receiving up until that point. That wasn't the case probably by 11 o'clock in the morning. It happened that quick.
Mm-hmm. What happened by 11?
My understanding and my observation was by 11 o'clock, we had a significantly embedded, clearly beginning to occupy, and in some cases fortify, elements of Wellington Street, the Parliamentary District, and other parts of our downtown core. That we were not able to maintain the agreed level of cooperation with the various convoys, and that the traffic plan and the staffing and reserve staffing was significantly, if not already fully exhausted. I did not have the detailed descriptions as have been provided in testimony here around what was taking place in the NCRCC, and I can't validate or invalidate the level of chaos and potentially the occasional F-bomb that might have been thrown around in that room of dedicated professionals who were having been, excuse my term, punched right in the nose and engaged in a standing 8 count, trying to get the city back to a level of safety as quickly as they can, and also trying to keep our Ottawa Police Service members and our partner agency members, our city workers, residents, business owners, as safe as they possibly could in a set of circumstances that at this point, sir, clearly was unprecedented. Clearly was unprecedented.
So are you describing the event of the 29th?
The morning, early afternoon of the 29th, which essentially stayed on a steady state with varying degrees of crowd dynamic and other injects like alcohol and drugs into the evening. But that was pretty well the next 72 hours.
So at some point on the 29th, you realize that you're confronting something unprecedented.
Yes, sir.
So by the end of the weekend, the Ottawa police was completely overrun by the citizens of Canada that showed up in Ottawa to end federal mandates, right? To stop the draconian measures that have separated people their ability to go to work, to hang out with loved ones, the stigma that was created around society. We wanted to end the division in society. And all of Canada showed up from all over the place, showed up in Ottawa that weekend, and the Ottawa police wasn't ready. And Sloly took it personally. You're going to see here.
In addition to the perspectives of the residents and business owners, etc., since you're the chief of the Ottawa Police Service, can you tell us how were the members of the Ottawa Police Service holding up? Because this was only the beginning. It continued for another 3 weeks or so.
This is always a little tricky part for me, sorry.
You want us to take a break? And
Thank you, sir. It's okay. They were doing their very best.
Your best. Losers always whine about their best.
Under inhuman circumstances, like the city was, like the community was. It was too cold and it was too much.
Uh-huh.
But they did their very best. And I'm grateful to them. And they should be celebrated. Not celebrated, that's the wrong word. They should be understood.
Do you feel that they were misunderstood?
Yes.
Can you elaborate on that?
I think I've given this testimony in parliamentary standing committees. The level of disinformation and misinformation was off the charts. It was crushing to the members' morale. It was crushing to the incident command team's morale. It was crushing to my executive team's morale. I suspect it was crushing to the board. It was crushing to everybody. It was unrelenting. It was 24 hours a day. And I think by the end of the weekend, it had become a global story that mainstream media was following. And none of it was portraying in any way accurate the hard work of the men and women of the Ottawa Police Service and the partner agencies that stood with us. None of it. To this day, it hasn't. And that is very unfortunate because public trust and confidence in any police service, I believe, is the #1 public safety factor. When any police service loses significantly public trust and confidence, that in of itself is a massive public safety threat and risk. It materializes in so many ways. I don't know if the commissioner wants me to expand on that, but I'm happy to do so. And unfortunately, as quickly as the events unfolded on the morning and the afternoon of the Saturday, public opinion against the Ottawa Police Service and its members turned just as quickly and to the same unprecedented levels that were unrelenting, at least from my entire experience, up until February 15th.
Well, you spoke of how the officers were misunderstood. Let's hope that this inquiry will be the beginning of that understanding.
So there's Sloly's emotions, and I believe they're real. I don't think he's acting there playing a part. It's the way I thought immediately of how they treated Rittenhouse is how they're going to treat Sloly, but whatever. So I believe he did care. I believe he felt like his team lost, and a lot of people there were in his police service were suffering for much different reasons. Those guys were living in their cars downtown in that cold that you're referring to, right? And a lot of those families in those trucks had nothing to go back to. So you can cry for your officers, that's cool, but you can't shit on any of us for crying about the community that has been deeply harmed by these mandates. Next, we're on to what happens after January 31st, where they call it an occupation, and we start to see people getting mixed up and jumbled around and trust issues. So here we go.
Really hard. I'd like to take you now to January the 31st, which I believe is the Monday after.
Yes, sir.
We've heard from Deputy Chief Ferguson that was when the executive team realized that a lawful protest has now turned into an illegal occupation. That was her evidence, and I'm interested in your view on that.
My view is it was unlawful the moment a law was broken in relation to the events. And so for me, that was clearly the Saturday morning. I don't want to in any way interpret Acting Deputy Chief Ferguson's impression. I think I would position the 31st as we now know this is going to be a longer term occupation. There are fortifications and there is an alarming level of public safety issues writ large, and we're going to have to pivot our plan to now address the current context and near future context that we're going to be dealing with. So it's in that context that perhaps, again, I don't want to misinterpret, but perhaps the full command is fully on the same page and the incident command team is pivoting the plan now into the next phase of this occupying period.
Tell us about that pivot. What did the executive team decide to do?
I don't know if there's any significant decision. I mean, we needed a significant update on the intelligence threat risk. Much of that was in place in the buildup and iterations, but we now needed to escalate to another level. And again, that cycle of intelligence threat risk assessment to then feed the pivoting operational plan. To what extent are we going to need different resources, greater levels of resources in one area versus another area? And to what extent do we need to build out sub-plans and other things? For me at the chief of police level is what resources are we going to need? What do I now need to do to inform and or engage other levels, including the oversight body of the Ottawa Police Services Board, the City of Ottawa, and other factors. And I was still trying to understand really what had just arrived in our city. What really was it? And even just level set my own understanding, never mind the work that was being done on behalf of me through Deputies Bell and Acting Deputy Ferguson.
Deputy Bell described that first week as a period of orientation or reorientation. Do you agree with that description?
I think I understand the theme behind it. I would probably use different language, but I think it's definitely what just happened. How do we now need to reorient, to reassess, and then start to address the situation going forward?
So before the convoy arrived, we've seen an initial plan dated January the 28th.
Yes, sir.
What was the understanding now in terms of going forward, in terms of the need for a new plan?
Well, there was no need for a new plan. There was a need for an evolution of the plan that we had. An evolution of the threat risk assessment that was in that plan. Again, I want to make it clear there was only ever one plan. There were many iterations of it. There was only ever one threat risk assessment. There were many iterations of it.
So what was the understanding then about this, the need for this new evolved plan?
On the Monday, the 31st?
Yes.
Probably the number one thing at that point was staffing.
And how did you go about achieving that?
Again, without the absence of my notes, but as simple as how many more officers can we redeploy from our overall complement of policing a city of 1 million people in the nation's largest municipal geography to that micro core of the red zones and the immediate neighborhoods around it. I think by that point, again, I'd stand to be corrected if the records say otherwise, but at that point we had already started to look at changing our shift hours to create a greater volume of officers available, officers and civilian members. I don't know if we had at that point reached out to the association, the Ottawa Police Association, to start to negotiate a whole different shift schedule. That might have come later on in the week, but that was the focus. And then external resource requests, requests that went to OPP and other police services to send additional resources on top of what they had provided us already.
So around that period, January 31st and the next few days, did the OPS start reaching out to other external agencies for help?
Yes, I'll come back to the question that you wanted me to answer.
Yes, because I'm interested in this notation that POU units across the province needed.
So I'd say around the midpoint of that meeting, I would have almost turned to Michelle Morin and Mike Stoll, who were sitting to my right, and said, what's the level of POU that you would think we would need to start to dismantle the red zone and end the occupation? And then there was like a real-time discussion between my folks and the other POU commanders in the room. There were others that were chiming in. It was mainly a POU discussion, and I'd been in them many other times before, so I know how this feels. I just sort of sat back and watched this new generation of experts do their thing, and it was kind of cool to watch. And within a really short period of time, it was almost unanimous. This may not be the exact language, but it's close to it. We're going to need everything in Ontario and a bunch more from across Canada. that was one of the moments where I truly understood the scale of what we were facing. Everything in Ontario and a bunch more from across Canada for me was state visits, an Olympic event, G8, G20. Nothing else requires that. Mm-hmm. That's when I truly understand from people with amazing expertise from different jurisdictions. Add on to that whatever other resources we're going to request, that's somewhere already in the range of 600, 700, 800 officers, plus investigators, plus boots on the ground officers, plus dispatchers, analysts, special constables to handle mass arrests. The number is going to be well north of 1,000, and it's way more than we will ever be able to supply within the Ottawa Police Service, within the eastern region of Ontario, within the province.
So that recognition came as early as February 1st?
Yes, sir.
1930.
Which day would that be? Is it the first or the
It
second?
would be the first, I believe, because the date after the line is February the 2nd. We can go back and check. The date might have been on the first page, actually. So can we go back to the first page to establish the date? Or the second page, I guess? Oh, no. Okay, so keep going down. All right, so this is page 2 of 7. It's February 1st. Now we scroll down. That's right. This is the next page. I was informed by Deputy Chief Trish Ferguson to report to duty tomorrow at Greenbank and to take care of my teams. No reason why I was removed from NCRCC and that I am no longer the event commander. So the notation on this date suggests that he was removed and he didn't understand why. Now, if we go to page 6, go down a bit. Okay, so now we have his notes on February the 10th, and the notation says, advised by Acting Deputy Chief Ferguson that Chief Sloly had me removed by her on February the 1st. So it appears from these notes that he was removed on the 1st, not told why, and then there's a notation on the 10th that giving him the reason that he was in fact removed by her, well, through her by you. So I just wanted to get your position on what happened.
Absolutely false.
Okay.
Never gave that direction.
So in fact, you were not aware that he was removed?
I understood from my recollection, and I don't know if there's notes to support it, my recollection is hearing that Inspector Lucas was very tired. He'd been gone through the entire planning cycle and had survived through that first weekend, and he had requested time off, and it was for him that Superintendent Dunlop was replacing. I don't recall a reference to Superintendent Riom. I have no recollection whatsoever of any conversation in which it was suggested to me or I directed that Superintendent Riom be removed as the event commander.
Right.
Zero.
Okay. Now, if we could go back
And it's very concerning that it's articulated in that way.
Well, that's why I want to bring these to your attention so you have a chance to respond. OPS 3014484. And if we can go to page 10, please. So these are notes to yourself again? Yes?
Yes, sir.
It's dated February the 5th. Title is Meet with Acting Deputy Chief Ferguson and DC Bell. I advised that I had only just officially heard that Superintendent Dunlop had replaced Inspector Lucas as the incident commander at the previous briefing. So you just learned on the 5th that Dunlop is now the commander. And
Well, sorry, again, here's the confusion for me, because either in that meeting or before, Acting Deputy Chief Ferguson said, Lucas needed time off, we brought Dunlop in. So that's why I'm referring to Lucas, not Riom here. In my mind, my notes, contemporaneous notes are, Lucas got replaced. Why? Why didn't you tell me? I had no idea about the Riom piece. I had no idea about why he was removed. I had no idea he was removed. My only context was Lucas was removed, and that was surprising for me.
yes, I'm not challenging your version. I'm just trying to understand from your perspective just what happened, because it was pretty confusing when we're trying to go through the record, as you can imagine. The next paragraph, DC Bell advised that he was the new incident commander installed this week, referring to Dunlop, and was leading the implementation of the preferred POU option. I asked why I was not advised of the change in the incident commander from Inspector Lucas to Superintendent Dunlop. Acting Deputy Chief Ferguson took ownership of that failure to communicate, and DC Bell admitted it was based on his recommendation. I counseled Acting Deputy Chief Ferguson that she was accountable for all incident command decisions, so I hold responsible for this change and for not advising me of the change. I counsel that DC Bell, that he's to stop interfering in Acting Deputy Chief Ferguson's role as Major Incident Commander. I counsel both that such major changes in the leadership of the Incident Command was to come to me for final approval outside of operational exigencies. I advised both that I did not have confidence in Superintendent Dunlop as the Incident Commander based on his performance at the Panda game and so on. So I just want to clarify a number of things. First, when Superintendent Riom, as the event commander, was replaced by Jamie Dunlop on or around the 1st of February, you had no knowledge of that until on or around the 5th.
Even on the 5th, I don't think I realized what had happened to Riom.
Right, but you did not understand that the event commander is now Dunlop. You did not know that until the 5th.
Yes, sir.
And that was concerning for you.
Extremely.
You addressed the situation with both Ferguson and Bell, and that is because, as the chief executive, you needed to know.
I need to know who was running our operations.
So what effect, if any, did that incident have on your trust of your team, your command team?
It was a massive trust hit.
Tell us about that.
I think it's pretty clear. Honestly, we're in the middle of what is now, I consider, a national security crisis. My opinion, doesn't have to be held by others. Certainly a local public safety crisis. And one of, if not the most important functions, is the incident commander. The major incident commander, event commander, incident commander, that is my entire understanding of the leadership capability and capacity to orchestrate all of what needs to be done across the incident command system, just so that we can continue to provide adequate, effective policing. That is a major level change, and one that was made without any consultation, any communication to me, and one that appeared to have been kept secret from me until literally it came up in the briefing meeting that I had called. I don't even know if to this day that I didn't call that briefing meeting, that I wouldn't have known about it until the Sunday, the Monday, or the Tuesday. What's also materially important here, if you scroll back up, please. Right there. I asked why I was not advised, sorry. He was the new incident commander installed this week and was leading the implementation, this is Dunlop, was leading the implementation of the preferred POU plan. Superintendent Dunlop was not at the February 1st meeting in Canada, that 2-hour plus meeting where we had that discussion around where are we now and how can we get out of this. He was not a part of the discussion with the public order unit commanders who were expert in that area. How could he have been replaced to lead this if he wasn't part of that essential meeting? I left explicit instructions, and it was in the notes that you showed earlier. If you need anything more from me, if you need to clarify, I'm available to you. This is clearly one of the most important things that I've asked Trish Ferguson and her incident command team, who were there represented as fully as they could be. Lucas couldn't attend, you recall, for whatever reason. This is critical. I need a set of options in 3 days before the weekend events come. And somehow in that time frame, without me understanding or even knowing, a switch of that magnitude was made and then put in charge of the planning for that I was expecting a briefing on. I finally got a briefing later in the afternoon on the 5th of those 3 options. Could it have meant I could have had a briefing on the Wednesday or the Thursday? Possibly. And could that have meant that we could have started 2 days, 3 days, 4 days earlier to actualize that scale of operations, including making the request for the public order commanders on scale that I was told on the February 1st meeting? We lost time, and clearly there was a lot of confusion. Even this note demonstrates I'm still not quite sure who's running what. And for a chief of police, with the citizens in the trauma and victimization that they were under, our own members, as struggling as they were, at best I can call this a significant lack of judgment on behalf of my 2 operational deputies. At worst, probably this would have been a review that I would have done after the events had concluded and looked at it even more closely.
So we've seen the miscommunication within the Ottawa police. We've seen them ask for officers. There was an incident where he asked for almost 2,000, and Abrams believed he was asking for double more than what he needed. There was some disagreement about how many and why, and what was the intentions of those, and was this okay for ask all these resources? And Sloly says it accurately. He's like, this is an unprecedented event. This is like a Olympic event. This is a world leader event, G20, G8. And he's saying you need maximum amount of officers to deal with this. And fair enough, you need officers to deal with safeties. It's the POU unit, which is the SWAT team folk. And you heard the name Patterson, which you're going to hear again. Patterson was removed, I believe, in July, or suspended in July for misconduct. He actually wasn't able to testify in the commission. So Patterson, his name comes up again as part of the POU unit. But they needed all these units, and fine, you want to keep order and keep discipline in your city because people are scared, nervous, and etc. You have to, fine. I don't think Sloly brought those people in to beat the shit out of people. However, we found out later through other testimony what the politicians wanted was the protests dismantled and removed, and the only way to dismantle and remove was through POU units or through extreme measures. So now we're going to go on to what happened at Coventry Road and thereon after.
So at 4:40 p.m. on February the 6th, Superintendent Patterson advised Staff Sergeant Ferguson that POU was going to Coventry Road and would be seizing fuel for evidentiary purposes. At that time, POT had been at Coventry Road for at least 2 hours, engaging with protesters. Staff Sergeant Ferguson informed Superintendent Patterson that POT was negotiating with the protesters and that they were compliant. But Superintendent Patterson indicated that he intended to proceed with the public order operation. Staff Sergeant Ferguson attempted unsuccessfully to convince others in OPS not to proceed with the public order operation at Coventry Road. At 5 p.m., Inspector Marin reiterated Superintendent Patterson's direction to Staff Sergeant Ferguson that they did not want the fuel from Coventry Road to be displaced and that they were proceeding without warrant. At 5:10 p.m., Staff Sergeant Ferguson contacted Deputy Chief Bell and advised him that the enforcement operation would undermine PLT's negotiations, which had been proceeding for at least 2 hours. Staff Sergeant Ferguson informed Deputy Chief Bell that protesters were compliant, Shortly after the call ended at 5:18 p.m., Deputy Chief Bell contacted Staff Sergeant Ferguson and informed him that he agreed with Superintendent Patterson's decision. Later that evening, Staff Sergeant Ferguson learned that Deputy Chief Bell supported Superintendent Patterson's decision because 3 convoy vehicles had left the Coventry Road site and were transporting fuel to supply protesters downtown. In a nutshell, that's what happened. Do you have any view on what transpired there? And any thoughts on how these kind of problems or troubles could have been avoided?
Well, if that is accurate, again, it's one person's account, but for the purpose of, there's so many problems in this paragraph beyond the PLT.
Mm-hmm.
Staff Sergeant Ferguson contacting Deputy Chief Bell.
Sorry?
Staff Sergeant Ferguson contacting Deputy Chief Bell makes no sense to me.
Why is that?
Deputy Chief Bell is not in charge of operations in any way on February 6th. That is an internal incident command contact out of the incident command system to another deputy chief that doesn't have a functional role in the incident command system. So that alone is very confusing and concerning for me.
So problem number 1, keep going.
Problem number 2, I'm going to assume that at any given time across the theater that we were dealing with here, even in the micro red zone and Coventry Road being a 10, 15-minute drive from that, there's a lot of moving parts. If Staff Sergeant Ferguson, who probably at that point was a couple of days into his assignment, is not trained on PLT and has not up until that point been materially involved in the intelligence threat risk assessment, all of the various iterations of the operational plans and the subplans, is all of a sudden in the middle of PLT world, he's likely not aware of the larger intelligence and the larger frame of operations that Superintendent Patterson is. Even Superintendent Patterson is probably 24 hours into his job. So there's a lot of people who've been all of a sudden moved into different positions after a period of Rayom, Dunlop, Patterson. There's a lot of confusion happening at this point. This is clearly an evidence of a suboptimal system trying to right itself. People trying to do the right things, but not really coordinating, in some places conflicting. And people trying to get help, but going up the wrong chains of command, and the wrong chains of command getting involved in areas that they shouldn't be getting involved in. If this is accurate, Deputy Bell should have contacted Deputy Ferguson. There's a concern from PLT. I'm making you aware of it. Can you manage that back down? That would have been more appropriate. So there's a lot of things happening here. It's on the basis of one individual's concept, and that's an individual who's probably relatively new into their position and has never been trained on PLT.
So which one you're talking about now?
That big long paragraph.
No, which one? Who wasn't trained on PLT?
My understanding is that John Ferguson was a trained and excellent crisis negotiator,
right,
but was never trained on PLT as a police liaison officer. That's my understanding. I stand to be corrected.
Right. So to summarize, we have confusion regarding the command structure. Who should be reporting to whom about what? You were giving us the example of Staff Sergeant John Ferguson seeking direction from Bell.
I suspect John's substantive position is under Deputy Bell's command. And so in his brain, if I have a problem, I escalate it to my deputy. I'm assuming that.
Right.
That's the only reason, logical reason why he would go to Deputy Chief Bell and not go through Patterson, Acting Deputy Chief Ferguson to get a resolution to the problem that he's facing.
And there were a lot of movement from one unit to another for a lot of people during those periods.
Absolutely.
Right? And the fact that the event commanders has changed a few times, Patterson being the third commander, also didn't help. What about the fact that the PLT and the enforcement arm, which we learned were the two sides of the command triangle? What about the fact that they didn't seem to be coordinating their actions in carrying out their respective responsibilities? Is that a big concern?
It's a big concern, sir. And again, I reiterate, this is an Ottawa Police Service that its PLT program is a part-time program. PLT officers, I had approved them to get training, I think in the late summer, early fall of 2021. So they're a part-time group of people who within 6 months get some training. We're still in COVID. I don't know how many times they've been able to utilize that training in any substantive way before the arrival of this massive, unprecedented event. And then they're literally asked to do the impossible from the beginning to the end and do the best job they possibly can. But no, there isn't an optimal optimization within this incredible, unprecedented event between that command triangle. There isn't. And even with the extra help that we got from the OPP and the arrival of experts like Inspector Baudouin, we weren't going to be able to flick a switch and all of a sudden go from OPS immaturity to OPP excellence within the dynamics of what's taking place in real time in the city of Ottawa.
So without any unrealistic expectation of flicking a switch, what are your thoughts on what we can do better in terms of avoiding this kind of troubles? What can we learn from all of this?
Okay. Well, first of all, again, Commissioner, with the incident command system, I had the honor and pleasure in, I think, 2008, 2009, along with Mike McDonnell, then of the RCMP, and Sue O'Sullivan, who was then a deputy chief here in the Ottawa Police Service. All of us had been trained up on the incident command system. We believe that was the appropriate incident command system for the types of demonstrations we were seeing in the new century. I hate to make myself sound old, but that's what we were back then. And we had made presentations to the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police that to avoid integration challenges, we should have a standard incident command approach across the province. We were able to get the OACP executive to adopt that. And that became, through that process, I want to say the standard because I can't say for sure it's written into the current Police Service Act standards, but that became the default standard for incident command across the province. We attempted to do that at CACP level. I got promoted and I don't know where that ended up. I now know there's a national framework. Long way of saying, we're going to increasingly have to bring large organizations together across potentially multiple sites we need to be working off the same understanding, nomenclature, processes. We need to narrow that gap of a gray zone between strategic, operational, and tactical. I would suggest we also need to narrow the gray zone around a working incident command structure as it sits into the regular business of policing in any jurisdiction or multiple jurisdictions. Training needs to be standardized, nomenclature needs to be standardized, equipment needs to be standardized, joint training needs to happen, and all of that has to happen a long time before a major unprecedented paradigm-shifting event like what we just saw arrives in any jurisdiction. This is one of those structural deficits, sir, that have existed for decades in policing. It doesn't all require money, but it's going to require a little bit of investment on that end. But it requires an investment of time and resources and focus. And what this event did to Ottawa, to Ontario, and Canada was exposed that type of structural deficit. It's the same concept of structural deficit around intelligence gathering. We can't afford to duct tape our way through these incidents anymore. And unfortunately, this reads like a duct tape effort to get through a really complicated, dynamic situation. I need to be clear. Every name here did their best in the circumstances they found themselves in. I don't read into anything here a deliberate attempt to undermine or frustrate or cause risk to the public. It just didn't go off very well.
All right, so how did we get to this point? We slowly came in with a change mandate. That's a new guy coming into a new organization. There's a bunch of issues, right? You had that happen. You had a bunch of trucks come in the city from across the country, and intel wasn't necessarily great, and you had a bunch of trucks park on Wellington initially, and that screwed up the traffic plan. When the traffic plan got screwed up, they didn't know where to put people, where to park people. There was issues communicating within the service. Then Superintendent Rayom gets canned and no one seems to know why. And then people get shuffled and communication is shit across the board. Or then you have pressure coming down slowly from the political sphere. And this is where we're going to end Sloly's testimony here. I thought about going through all the cross-examination, and it's all just building on these ideas of really bad communication, really bad organization, really bad accountability, and if you gotta give Sloly's credit for what he's trying to do here, right? You gotta give him credit for what he's trying to do, and that's just trying to protect the city that he was paid to protect. And you can't do it alone, man. So a bunch of things fell apart for him, and the last part here is the board.
So this is a call on February the 14th. So if we scroll down a little, when asked by Chair if any of my orders were disobeyed during the demonstration, Chief advised there have been major issues with senior leadership team members, but he has not had time to do an investigation on what has been going on here. The best and the worst of us have been strained. That is why there has been tense meetings and why some have not demonstrated their best efforts. Like everyone, I have been at my best and I have not been at my best. Can you explain what you meant there?
There was a discussion in there with the Chair around the quality of support that I was receiving inside the organization and my own sense of where we were at the leadership level. A reasonable question from the chair of the Police Services Board at the direct employee level that the board has with myself, and in this case only Deputy Chief Bell, because Acting Deputy Chief Ferguson was not an employee of the board. And I gave my best answer to her. There were some challenges. I actually think these notes capture it well. There would be elements of some of those leadership challenges that would need to be reviewed in an after-action report. Again, I didn't have a chance to ever conduct that. And I'd made decisions on the fly in the midst of this very fluid situation to address conduct issues and park them, or address them and move on from them completely. But I also gave the caveat that there had been incredible levels of stress and fatigue, and that clearly no one, including myself, could claim that they were always operating at their best.
How did that lack of trust affect the leadership of the OPS during the convoy events? In a sense, did it make you more likely to step in and provide directions because you could not trust others to lead at the strategic or operational levels?
No. It's an important question you're asking, and it's not an easy question to answer. So please, if you can give me some leeway here. There was a significant trust issue. That's the only significant trust issue that I was aware of and I thought had a material impact on the events that transpired over those weeks, was the switching out of Superintendent Rayom for Superintendent Dunlap. And we've been through that, so I won't go back to it. When I realized what had happened, as close as I can, good discipline should be, in the small d discipline, should be applied as quickly to the event. I immediately called a meeting with the two command officers. I asked them a straight question, and to their credit, they gave me straight answers. I wasn't happy with the answers, meaning I was disappointed that they had chosen to go that route, and I expressed that immediately and clearly. And then I counseled them immediately, and I told them what good behavior would look like going forward. And then I moved on from it. And as I said earlier on, they both, in their own ways, worked back towards demonstrating trust and capability. What I was asked here was, overall, what's happening? And I related that circumstance, but there were other elements of a lack of cohesion within the team. People making assumptions. We've heard already elements of people taking a rumor and assuming it's truth and how that impacted a range of issues from PLT to whether or not there was a plan to whether or not the plan had been approved. So those were issues that I was dealing with on an ongoing basis. They were difficult issues to deal with. They took time and energy away from everybody involved, including me. And in some cases, they caused confusion. So those are the types of things I was trying to relate to the chair, but I was also trying to relate the context in which we had found ourselves. Unprecedented, uncharted, unrelenting pressures inside the organization and outside the organization to not leave her with the impression that we were having some sort of a mass internal revolt. That was my understanding at that time. And that's what I tried to relay as honestly and as fully to the chair at that time.
But your obligation to provide the board the information they need in terms of to be able to exercise their oversight function, that's irrespective of whatever internal issues the board may be dealing with on its own, right?
It is a factor that came into my consideration as to the level of detail that I could provide on intelligence, threat risk assessments, operational plan, or other operational details.
So is your evidence that the reason that more information on the operational plan was not provided to the board because you had confidentiality concerns about that board specifically?
My evidence is that is one of the factors I had to consider, yes.
Okay, and so what were the other factors?
That I was not going to be handing over an entire detailed operational plan to the board. It's not a practice I'd ever seen done before. It's not one that I'd be comfortable with. And from my knowledge of the Morgan report, not one that's required.
Okay, but a summary wasn't provided either, right?
No, we did provide summaries on a regular basis.
In terms of like a document which provides a high-level summary?
A document? No. In hours-long board meetings, we were all dedicated to this. We were asked repeatedly questions and provided as much information as we possibly could. I can't recall whether or not somebody provided a summary document. That I can't recall.
Okay. Well, Chair Deans testified that at times she did not have the information she needed in order to exercise her oversight function. Does that concern you?
Not at all. Well, it concerns me that she would characterize it that way. I had daily calls, sometimes twice and 3 times daily calls with Chair Deans. We offered the board and they accepted to do ride-alongs. I think 4 of the 7 board members actually participated in ride-alongs that were by my service sergeant major, who actually put them in a police vehicle and drove them throughout the theater in safe ways. They had hours with the service sergeant major to ask any questions that they wanted. I had given explicit instructions to the service sergeant major to answer those questions as fully and honestly as possible. So we went through a variety of means beyond public meetings to ensure that the board could literally see and be in the theater, talk to frontline officers, have direct access to the chief of police on a regular basis, on a daily basis, including the formal board meetings. I can't understand why Chair Deans would say that she did not have the ability to ask questions and receive information in a very timely manner.
Okay, I'll take you to OPS 3011037. And these are, again, your notes. These are from February 11. And I'll take you to page 6 of your notes. And if we go to 1301, there, where it says call back from Diane Deans 1301. And then it says expectations for board meeting. Gonna do like we did on Monday, minimum level. Cannot and won't be drawn into what I cannot lawfully provide, i.e. staffing numbers, what the plans are. Need you to be clear and understanding about that. And if we keep going, the response will be as much as we gave you on Monday, cannot go into the confidential. Accusatory language and request for information that is unlawful for me to provide you will not be provided. She is accusing us of not responding to crimes. We don't respond to Twitter. She needs to report any threats. Was reported to Stephanie Lemieux. Encourage the board to not ask questions which cannot be answered operationally. So I want to ask you a few questions about that. It sounds like that was part of your exchange with Chair Deans on February 11. What did you mean by gonna do like we did on Monday, minimum level? Are you referring to the amount of information that you're going to give her?
Going to be consistent with what we've been doing all along. We're not going to be changing and deviating from that.
So minimum level.
Well, I don't know what that means. I know these are my scribe notes. We're going to be consistent with what we did on Monday is a substantive theme that I'm trying to relay there.
And when you, just to go up a little bit to the first part of that exchange. So when you say cannot, it won't be drawn into what I cannot lawfully provide, i.e. staffing numbers, what the plans are. You're indicating there that the board is not entitled to those, right? Staffing numbers and what the plans are?
Detailed plans, detailed staffing numbers, how many we're going to have on this shift, that shift, in public meetings and documents. Those are problematic questions.
Why is that?
For all the reasons that have been explained before. This was a unique event, that's for sure. But the types of questions we were getting repeatedly over and over and over again. What is the plan to end this? I'm looking out my window now. I can't see a police officer out there. Unfortunately, these were the types of questions that just couldn't be answered. And we're taking up hours of our time, literally, at these meetings.
And then you say cannot go into the confidential. In camera would have allowed you to go into the confidential.
I don't think I'm referring to in camera there. I cannot go into the confidential elements of what we're doing, I think is what I was trying to say there. I would have said in camera.
Right, but my question is, can't you get into confidential matters in camera?
Yes, and I think at the previous meeting, what's the date of this?
February 11th.
Right. At the previous meeting, I think I urged them at least 3 or 4 separate times in the February 5th meeting, let's go in camera.
Okay, so you are saying you can give confidential information as long as it's in camera.
I can give more information in camera. I wasn't at that point committing to give everything that I was being asked, but I certainly could give more information in camera.
Okay. And what did you mean? What did you understand to be unlawful for you to provide in terms of information, and what made it unlawful?
It's probably more loose language. I don't know if it would have meant unlawful, but I certainly wouldn't be giving. There are unlawful information around human resources, things, conduct information that wouldn't necessarily be lawful for me to provide, but I'm not sure what the actual reference there is.
In your view, as you sit here today, is there any information that you lawfully cannot provide an oversight board?
I'm sure that there would be something that would allow for that to happen. I'm not sure I could give a member's blood type or something like that, but there might be some limits on that. But I think in general, we can share the information of the organization.
Generally, the board is entitled to any information they need in order to exercise.
There may be some restrictions, and I'm not an expert on privacy or human rights to be able to say that there's health information that we would have in the records of the Ottawa Police Service that relates to a member's psychological assessment that I could hand over in complete free form to the board.
Right, but I mean, the board, as you know, takes an oath of confidentiality, right?
I know that, and they had broken that at least on one occasion during my tenure. So that oath of confidentiality doesn't mean that there aren't problems with the board's ability to maintain its oath of confidentiality.
Right, and I guess what I'm saying is that whatever board, the issues the board may have does not alleviate your responsibility to provide information that the board needs, right?
You're right, but it does cause me to have to be very careful under the conditions that I do it, and this was a national security event.
So you would agree with me then that under the Police Services Act, there's no restriction on the information that can be provided,
Subject to other acts and legislation, I would agree with you.
Sure. And so right now, there's nothing specifically that you can point me to say it's unlawful for me to provide this type of information, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Please. Final topic, your resignation. Chair Deans told the commissioner that in the midst of these events, the convoy events, she spoke with you and performed a form of wellness check you had a conversation with you. Do you recall, first of all, having that encounter with her?
I had a conversation where it was not a wellness check, sir.
She told us that she told you that there were people who, I think she used this language, wanted your head.
Yes, sir.
Do you recall that?
Yes, sir.
Can you tell us what was your reaction to that?
I have to tell you, sir, I think by that point, the wanting your head comment just piled on to the hundreds, if not thousands of other comments that I was receiving through literally every form of human communication possible.
She told us that she telephoned you on the evening of the 14th of February and that she raised the issue of your possible resignation. You told us about that.
Yes, sir, she did.
And please tell the commissioner, what was your answer to Chair Deans when she asked you whether you wished to resign?
My answer was actually reasonably accurate as reported by Chair Deans. I put my heart and soul into this. And by this, Commissioner, I meant this entire Ottawa Police Service for my entire tenure as a Chief of Police. And it included the last 3 very difficult weeks of the convoy events. I told her that it was my intention to see it through, right to the end, a successful and safe end for the events happening here in Ottawa, and through that a contribution to the events happening across the country. I told her that it was very inappropriate for her to have this call with me, I think at 9:30 at night on Valentine's Day, and I just happened to be in my bedroom with my wife, trying to get some sleep before another busy day the next day. And to be asking me to resign from my office at this stage, at that time, and in that manner, I thought was very inappropriate.
What did she ask you to do in response when you told her that?
Think about it. Which to me meant she'd already made up her mind. She wasn't interested in hearing anything about my commitment to the organization, my commitment to see it through. She was pushing for me to resign.
Did she ask you to think about it overnight?
Yes.
Now, you've explained that to the commissioner your resignation was motivated by your wish to enhance public safety and removing yourself from the equation and allow the resources to be obtained. Was it also important to you, or how important was it to you to show the community and the service and your family who had come to follow you here to Ottawa that you were not quitting?
It was critically important on both ends. Most importantly, Commissioner, to do everything I could, literally with the last act of my time in office, to remove myself out of a trust equation that was heading in the wrong direction for the Ottawa Police Service, which I led. Anything that could have contributed to faster and more resources arriving in the city to address the still metastasizing local crisis and national crisis was my obligation, was my responsibility, and so I took that last act. But I will tell you, it mixed very heavily with the concept of me quitting something. And to this day, it still rubs me. That won't do justice. It still hurts me and it hurts my family.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Commissioner. I have a further question.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So that's it. That's how it ends. He's told to resign at 9:30 p.m. on a Sunday, on Valentine's Day. It was Monday. Called at 9:30 at night. You should probably resign on Valentine's Day. So it's over for him, and that's the end of the story. And as we've gone through the commission, we've kind of seen other things pop up from other people that have filled in some gaps of the story. I let some of the clips run long because I figured it's important to hear his story and see who he is as for us to understand the character of Peter Sloly into what happened at the convoy. There's a lot of issues within the OPS. There was some bad communication between different layers of the OPS. Sloly and Carrick had a pretty good. Thomas Carrick of the OPP had a really good relationship. It seemed like he didn't know that Brendan Lucky and the federal government of Canada wasn't too happy with him because he just didn't destroy the protest. But what did you want him to do? He was right. You needed 2,000 officers in order to deal with the situation. You couldn't just go in there and smash and beat up and take away people. But that's what they were trying to suggest he did. And he didn't do it to his credit. And they kept grilling about the plan and the plan and the plan and the plan. And the plan that they wanted, we found out later, was for the police to be able to dismantle and remove everybody from that area. And that was not allowed under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So they passed the Emergency Act so they could haul people and their shit away. That's how it went. Because municipalities and federal governments refused to have negotiations, refused to see the people and their protest and their support from across the country. I don't know if at the commission they'll ever show all the flags and the people on the bridges that supported this. The money might talk enough for them because that's their, they care about the money. The $10 million should say a lot and almost in weeks, right? So I don't think Sloly is the bad guy. I think he was a fall guy. I think he just tried to do his job. And I think sometimes I think it's his job. Honestly, I think it's just his job. And whenever you think about that, whenever you think about that. But he didn't stomp the shit out of people. He didn't unlawfully pull away people. I don't like the fact he's using the word assaultiveness and violent behavior when there were four charges that were laid for any kind of violent behavior during the whole entire protest. So that's a microcosm of Canadian institutions at this time, is that we have an environment in Canada where our institutions do not work. And what we've clearly seen from the last 4 days or 3 days in the inquiry from where we are now on November 18th, I believe it is. Today's the 19th, I believe. And we've seen Brenda Lucky. Oh, I don't know. Anything's possible. Anything could happen. You saw Jody, the national security lady, saying that the rules of the CSIS Act are not exactly what it's referred to by this, and that she felt that she didn't have to listen to the CSIS and some other security intel because there's other stuff that she had to worry about, so she felt like there was an emergency. And then we had the Privy Council lawyers saying, well, that there were people that were still upset and they were thinking about coming back and that it could pop off again at any minute, so we had to make sure that we had to crush all dissent possible. Not even fucking thinking about what any person that was over there parked in their car was fighting for, and that was for their kids to have a future, so because they wanted to work. And y'all just shit on them. You literally just trampled them. You trampled your vets, right? You trampled your taxpayers. And now you're trying to say that it was an extreme thing across Canada. You call it racist and misogynist. Like, there you have it, That's Canada right now. Oh, God save Canada. Thanks for watching. Peace.
Reparations for me looks like the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, getting kicked in the face by a Clydesdale wearing cleats.